Hey folks, Simon here from the Velo Performance podcast, the podcast which is aimed at helping everybody in their 40s up the way, get the best out of their training, nutrition, and improve their health span. Now, this is something that over time I'm learning about and really trying to help the cyclists that I coach. And it's definitely something that you're going to be hearing a lot more here on the podcast itself. Now, in this month's podcast, I have Coach Sue from Velo Performance talking all about menopause and the stages of menopause and what it's like to go through menopause, perimenopause, and postmenopause as a female. If you're a male, don't switch off. This is a really good podcast to help you understand your female partner a lot better than you already do, because I think this is something that's not well talked about, and from a coaching perspective, it's something that I speak to my female cyclists a lot and very freely with, and we talk quite openly about what's going on with them physically, mentally, and I think that's really important from a coach's perspective. But Sue, and the reason why I've brought Sue on board at Velo is because as a female cyclist who has gone through menopause and understands it and has studied it, she's going to help our cyclists even more get the most out of their training and understand where they're at. And this is what this podcast is all about, is helping people understand what menopause is, how people navigate through it, what they should focus on, some of the symptoms. It's a fascinating podcast and we have a bit of fun in there too. Apologies for the banging to start off with, but people had turned outside the house and I thought I couldn't quite hear it on the recording, but you can. What they were doing was they were putting up scaffolding. Eventually, and you'll see it in the video if you're watching this on YouTube, and you may hear it on the podcast, me getting out of the chair and then shutting windows, which completely cancels out that noise. Anyhow, I hope you enjoy this video. I hope you enjoy this podcast. And without further ado, let's get into it. Sue, welcome.
Thanks for having us, Simon.
Cool. So look, we've had a little chat beforehand, but let's just crack on into it. So, I mean, obviously, we're working with cyclists and athletes who are sort of from 40 onwards. And, you're working with females. I've worked as female athletes and cyclists. And, if we're talking about menopause, where do we start? What should people know? What are the pitfalls?
So yeah, I mean, with the menopause, it's hard to know where to start because obviously, like we were just saying in our quick chat beforehand, research, there isn't much research. There isn't a massive understanding. Well, there is an understanding, but probably more in the scientific background, just not the people that need to know about menopause, especially women, and how it affects them. And in particular, I think also athletic women. So basically, I've said it before, anybody that exercises with intention is classed as an athlete. Yep. Because, you put routines into place because you have a goal to reach. So you're an athlete. You're training towards something. So, and I think the menopause is it really seems to affect people that already do a lot because it basically just comes in with a big right hook and you don't know why. Well, yeah, you don't know why because there isn't a massive amount of research and understanding out there. And we're not taught about it when we're younger, so we don't know when to expect it. So when all these weird and funky things start happening, we don't know what it is, and we tend to question our training to start with, and our diet, nutrition, and start making some weird choices, and then we can't understand why our moods are changing, why we're so tired, why our bodies are changing, why I can't remember anything from anything. All of a sudden from when you used to be like really good at it. So yeah, menopause affects every aspect of your life. But as athletes, it really is something that affects us even more, I feel. But just with a little bit of knowledge and being a little bit prepared, it can really make a big difference.
So do you feel, I mean, this is an interesting question. So from a female perspective, do you feel that even today in as much as coaches, we're aware of it, so we're very dialed into people talking about it, but do you think the general population really still are, for better want of a word, clueless to how this affects them in later life? Or do you think more people are becoming aware of it because of people like Stacey Sims and other evidence-based coaches talking about the female cycle and menopause? Or do you still think people are in the dark?
I think it's 50-50 because if you don't go out there and look for it, you're not told otherwise. Mm-hmm. So unless you follow people like Stacey Sims or the people at the Well HQ, for instance, that are doing lots of work about getting information into schools and clubs about women and training, and that's down to periods, down to kit, down to things as making sure that teams don't choose white shorts for women to exercise in. Right. You know, because that raises anxieties of when you're on your period. So the last thing you want to do, I was listening to a great example about Wimbledon, has only just said that women can wear dark coloured undershorts at Wimbledon. So, and some quite well-known female tennis players have spoken about, you know, their game's been a bit off because they've been on their period and things like that. But also, can you imagine trying to be in a semi-final or final of Wimbledon? You're on your period, you've been there for about 4 hours, you're about to serve for the match, and you're not quite sure whether you're leaking through your white shorts. That's the last thing you want to be anxious about. Yeah. You know, you'd be kind of interested in what you're about to serve for, really. Yeah. So, you know, so the guys at the Well HQ are starting to do a really good job and starting to inform from a lower level. But like I said, it's 50-50. If you're not out there looking for the information, someone's not going to tell you, pretty much.
Interesting. Okay. So, I mean, look, there's a lot to unpack when we're talking about this subject. Where do you think we should start?
I think if we just start with menopause, because the athletes that we deal with are classed as master athletes, so 40 plus, and perimenopause can start, or the symptoms can start as early as 35. So usually perimenopause begins between about 36 and 45 years old. So that's when the symptoms can start as early as 36.
Wow.
So yeah, so basically perimenopause is just a transition between the initial symptoms of menopause and then the cessation of menses. So symptoms can be hot flashes, anxiety, mood, fatigue, bones, muscles, aches, pains, hearing, eyes, gut, just to start. Sleep can be affected.
Yeah.
And then also it can last, usually the symptoms last between about 4 and 5 years, but for some unfortunate people, it can last up to 10 years.
Wow.
So that's a long time to have any kind of symptoms. So, you know, all of a sudden your sleep is not particularly great because you're having hot flashes, but then also your anxiety and your moods isn't particularly great. So you're not recovering from things very well because you're just constantly stressed. Cortisol is just going nuts. And then also your mood's a bit lower. So you might reach for some small sweet treats and things like that because it helps you feel better. Then you might put on a bit of weight. That doesn't make you feel any better. And so it all intertwines into all sorts of things. And basically with perimenopause, it's the estrogen and progesterone throughout your whole life has gone through a cycle. So when you're having your period, it's could be anything between 21 and about 40 something odd days is your period. It's not just 28 days, what people think it is. It could be anything of that. And it's a routine you've been in for a very, very long time. And And then all of a sudden, it just doesn't follow that routine at all. So you have no idea what's coming next. Because normally you're like, oh yeah, a couple of days before my period, I might get a bit bloated, my gut might play up a little bit, my sleep's way off. So I know that I'm not going to do certain things in my training or my social life around that time. Then a couple of days afterwards, I'm great. I feel superb. I feel really strong, really rested, and off I go again. When you hit the perimenopause, you just seem to lose all of that. And that's because your estrogen and progesterone is just it's on a roller coaster until you don't know which is going to be up and which is going to be down.
From working with females, athletes and cyclists, from some of the females that I've worked with who are experiencing perimenopause, it's so random. For sometimes as they're coming out of menses and hitting menopause, they find that everything just changes. So once where they were, on a secular sort of time of the month where it was just absolutely bang on the money, and they knew when it was turning up, it just suddenly would delay, and then everything, all their experiences was tenfold tougher. And I really feel for them, because all of a sudden where they could actually plan their life, everything's just gone haywire for them. And it's quite tough for them mentally and physically to deal with. And I think a lot of people, when I'm working with them, and you'll probably find this too, it's tough. It's just like, well, what's going on? And I think coaching them through that and having you on board to help people understand that better is really important.
Yeah, it's about empowering people, and us as coaches, it's about being aware of where our athletes are, and so that means that we've got to help our athletes become more aware of themselves as well. So that's why we always ask RPE, or coach's favorite question, how did that feel? We don't write it because we just want to start a conversation. We write it because we need to know whether the data that you've given us on that session that you've done is correct to how it should be. And when you're going through things like the menopause, it might not match what we see as data, and you might not be able to understand. So we're always looking for routines. We're trying to see how the data rolls. We're trying to compare it so we can get 2 months, 3 months, 4 months of an idea of how they go through their training. And if the athlete can be aware of how that session affected them today compared to when they did it maybe last year or a couple of years ago, it's really useful information. So by empowering and informing the athlete on what it is, then we can go, oh, okay, so it may be this. But also us as coaches understanding the complete randomness of perimenopause and particular symptoms, and going, right, okay, so say for instance, Whoop and Aura rings are becoming quite popular now. It's quite handy data for HRV, and resting heart rate and things like that.
Yeah.
It's still not 100% right, and they haven't quite got the formulas right for perimenopause women, but it's getting better. And so we can use that and say, actually, your resting heart rate this morning is up a little bit, or it's a bit random from where it normally should be. Your HRV is not acting like it should do. You're saying you're a little bit tired. I'll tell you what, go and do an easy ride today. Don't overthink it. Don't question it. We can still do something. And you just have to be a bit more fluid going through the perimenopause.
Definitely, that's the way that I think is a practice, and definitely that's the way I work with my female athletes. Is if they're finding that things just are like they're wading through quicksand, it's like, look, don't stress about this. We know that you're in a perimenopausal state, so your body's chucking you red flags at the moment. You need to be patient with it, and just let's back off from doing any intensity until you feel like you're ready for it. whereas I think a lot of people will try and push through and then review and find that they can't do it, and they start questioning themselves and potentially do the worst kind of training out there. And mentally, that they're kicking themselves in their own privates, basically. It's like, no, just back it off and give yourself a bit of time to recover until you feel ready. And then now it's time to do your harder training sessions. That makes it definitely makes it tougher from a coaching and planning perspective. And I'm also thinking that when you're working with people, and you're aiming for an end result, so let's say an event or a race, how you get there potentially takes longer because it's going to. So you have to start further out and say, look, we need to start here because we're going to hit roadblocks which are pretty difficult to negotiate to start off with, and we're going to move forward, and then we're going to move back, and we're going to have plateaus, and it's just going to be very random. So by starting earlier helps us develop your fitness and your robustness to get you into a position to hit your event in the best possible shape as we can. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. It's not, all coaches are like, when you get that inquiry, got an event in 12 weeks, can you give me a hand? We can help you a little bit. We can possibly give you a good routine and make you do the right stuff. When it comes to perimenopause, basically menopause happens at a time of life when your kids, your family's getting a bit older. They might be going off to university. You might be winding down your job. You might be going to part-time. You've got a little bit more time on your hands, and you're dreaming of all these trips to France or wherever where you can go and run and ride your bike and go and enjoy life. And this is one big mountain that's right in the middle of it, which could completely throw you off that lifestyle that you're aiming towards. So you've got to be prepared that you're in it for the long haul, and the way to be in it for the long haul is understanding how menopause affects you, because everybody's different. Like heart rate is different. Can't compare your heart rate to someone else's heart rate. The same as menopause, you can't compare it to someone else because it's completely different. And put as many good routines and habits in place as you're going through, and stick as close to it as possible, so that when you come out the other side, you're in the best place to continue to enjoy the rest of your active life. And
so if we talk about some really good quality habits and routines that people should follow, if we go back one step before we talk about that, is perimenopause massively different for each individual? Yeah, massively. And if we were to normalize and say a standard perimenopause duration time can be anywhere between what and what?
I would say it's between 4 to 5 years from the beginning of your first symptoms. So say for instance, for me, so I can say I now recognize my first symptoms, not at the time, about 4 years ago. And it was two things. I randomly started to get hay fever. Never had hay fever in my life. I lived and worked in and on the sea for 15, 20 years. Never had hay fever before. And I never got anxious or nervous. So I could go to, like, I've played sport all my life, and I've played sport in a variety of different stadiums and levels and things like that. And I did like nerves, because if I had nerves, I was switched on and I was getting ready and I knew I was in the right place. It's like, used to love it. It was great. And then all of a sudden, I started to get just a different kind of nerves. It was more anxious than nerves, like starting to question, I'm like, should I be here? I'm not normally an anxious person at all. I'm normally just like, I don't usually give a shit, excuse my language. I'm usually like, I'll just give it a go. Let's see what happens. I don't massively think what people think of me. If I want to go and give something a go, I'm going to go and give it a go. But I was just like, I remember driving up to the track in Newport, and I was like going, I don't think you've done enough. I don't think, you should be here racing against these people in the nationals. And I was like, have a word with yourself. What you're talking about? You'll never like it. Parked it, kept doing it. It was fine. And then I found that anxiousness was creeping into other parts of my life. So I had a co-steering company. In August, I used to meet 30 different individuals I'd never met in my life before, get to know them in 2 hours, do the session, and then I'll have another bunch the next day or whatever it was. And then I was just finding that just anxiety was just like, what if I don't like these people? What if the weather conditions aren't particularly great? What if I can't manage the group? And it was like, I've done this for 15 years. So where's that coming from?
Wow.
And so for me, but it took me a few years to realize that was actually, for me, the start of it. And then also hay fever, histamine, with estrogen. We have an estrogen bucket, say for instance, and when that's full, other stuff comes in to help to empty it, and then it starts again. Now, when the estrogen reaches like fullness, the histamine just starts to kick off. So if you have asthma, that will get slightly worse. If you have hay fever, that would get slightly worse. Or if you've never had fever, you start getting hay fever, and it's just like constantly having like a head cold, and you just feel a little bit out of breath. And people are like, "Oh, it's just hay fever. Just take some antihistamines or whatever." But it wasn't. It was all to do with the rise and fall of hormones.
Wow. Okay. And actually that brings me to, again, working in practice with female athletes, especially as they get older, is that anxiety and the second questioning and apprehension of themselves is something that maybe they subconsciously really beat themselves up about, and maybe they don't need to do so much, and they need to be aware that this is part of the transition in menopause. The reason why they're feeling this heightened anxiety is because they're going through menopause, and understanding that and knowing that it's normal is something that they can potentially attach their thought process to. Go, look, I'm aware I'm heightened, but this is normal for this to be like this. And I think understanding that helps them then understand themselves better. Yes?
Exactly. It is just about understanding. So, I'm quite a confident person. So when I was getting those anxious thoughts on my way up to the track, I'd be like, just forget about it. It's what you're talking about. Put some good music on. And then when you get to the track, you get into your routines of getting ready, your warm-ups, checking things out, blah, blah, blah. And then it goes away. But maybe, yes, some less confident people would allow that to bubble up and become a bit more. Yeah. So that's why it's important to know, how do you feel when you do certain things, and when is there a change? And if there's a change and you're 36 plus, just be aware that it possibly could be the start of perimenopause. The only caveat I'm just going to throw in there, though, is overtraining symptoms are very similar to perimenopausal symptoms.
Okay. But I mean, look, I'll chuck a curveball back at you. How many people do you know overtrain?
None, because I coach them really well.
Good answer. Give me 2 seconds. I'm just going to shut my window because some people have turned up and they've started putting some scaffolding on, which is what you can hear.
Yeah.
That's very annoying.
Classic.
I'll cut that out of the podcast, or maybe I won't.
No, maybe you should just leave it in there.
I'll just keep it in. So look, let's talk about some of the maybe strategies or practices people can put in to help them in their perimenopausal state. some things that you've learned, because this is the cool thing about having you on board the coaching team, is because, let's face it, you've gone through this, you understand it from your perspective, which helps other people become more aware of some of the pitfalls that can happen. But what do you, from your own experience and also from you studying it, what can people put into place and help them go through this stage?
Basically, is firstly, don't make any panic changes. So a lot of the time, because with menopause, because of menopause and stress, and then we have a lot of stress anyway, and us as athletes put a bit more stress on our bodies because we train, and that's what it is. And then we manage it by training, recovery, and whatever that through nutrition and sleep. And then we make sure that we have a nice progressive training plan. With menopause, perimenopause in particular, is making sure those routines are steadfast and in place already, and you stick to them as you go through perimenopause. In particular, sleep, having a good sleep habit, sleep routine, whether that's turning devices off at 9 o'clock, reading a book, making sure you're asleep by 10 o'clock, you get up at 7 a.m., you make sure you have those 7 to 9 hours sleep. You make sure that your nutrition is on point, protein in particular. You talk about it all the time for aging athletes anyway, to make sure that protein is maximized as much as possible, is regularly in your diet. Because if you regularly have protein in your diet, you don't have to worry too much about timings. Because as long as you have hit your protein goals, then the timings aren't massively important.
Yeah, so
it's a good habit though, good routine.
This is something I think, regardless whether you're male or female, is really important for everybody to understand. From my understanding of what I've been studying is, and we've talked about this many times, like, what's the difference? Is there any difference? And it is making sure you're eating adequate amounts of protein spread across the day so that you can maintain lean muscle mass and fund your training adaptations. It doesn't change across the board from women to men. Potentially women could have more protein because obviously as they go through menopause, their muscles become a bit more anabolically resistant, and therefore having a bit more protein and more quality protein with a high amount of leucine in it will help them improve those training adaptations. But it's such a good point. I think, I don't know how many times I've taken people on board, male and female, when you look at their diet and you realize they are hitting nowhere near the minimal standard practice that I preach, which is 1.6 grams of protein per kg of body weight spread across the day. They aren't hitting anywhere near that. Mm-hmm. And then when they start doing that, they notice changes for the positive on their body composition. And I think that's really important. Yeah, that's cool. That's a good thing to, it's a good thing to talk about.
Yeah, so I mean, really, you've got to remember that estrogen is important for bone strength, muscle health, cardiovascular health, and immune function. Progesterone is good for brain health and breast health, just to kind of summarize what it's good for. So when they're fluctuating, so if you ask anybody who's going through their period cycle, they will say that they will feel tired, or they might pick up a cold because their immune function's playing around a little bit. They ache a bit. They get a bit clumsy. They feel they get a bit clumsy, and they might drop things more than they normally do. Their breasts get tender. And these are all things that we know that's going to happen because it always happens during our cycle, and us as coaches take into account these facts and change their training program. But as you go through perimenopause, you don't know, like I said before, when these are going to happen, when they're going to go up and down. So by making sure that you're getting protein, especially the good amino acids, the leucine, making sure that it's in there, and by going to the gym, doing some plyometrics for your bone health, being active, I mean, obviously we deal with people being active all the time, but then making sure that you rest and get that right. So if you just remember that the hormones affect those 6 things, and as long as you make sure you've got habits in place to protect those 6 things, you're on a good step to the right, to coming out the other side being the most active and strong 50 plus woman that you can be.
Really interesting, isn't it? So I'm thinking while you're chatting there, I talk about this a lot just from an aging athlete, that we need to focus on eating differently from the mainstream, which is talking about fasting and, low carbohydrate and low protein. And, it's like, I always think of it as we need to think differently as older athletes. We need to not fast. We need to keep within our calories, definitely, for sure. And we need to make sure that we eat, as we're talking about, enough protein. But also, I think the thing that really rings a bell, which crosses the divide between men and women, is strength training. Because we know that as we get older, our muscles start to develop anabolic resistance. We know that it's harder for us to maintain the muscle mass. But we also know that if we do strength training alongside cardiovascular training, including HIIT training and high intensity training, that's really good for our muscle function, quality, everything else that backs off for improving our long-term health span. And I should imagine doing very specific work for females going through menopause is even more important for their bone health alongside their muscular health, and also their performance on the bike.
Massively, because you'll find that a percentage of women that exercise between 30 and 40, you'll probably lose about 50% of them during menopause because of perimenopausal symptoms going into menopause. They'll pick up injuries, and it takes longer to recover from them, because your tendons just don't recover as well as they used to do. If you get a muscle tear, everything just takes longer because you don't have those hormones working together to be able to control inflammation in your body. So, people will then come out the other side of menopause, either weighing more and doing less activity just because they didn't have good habits and routines going through the menopause, which meant that they were able to look after themselves and keep them at the top. So if the more informed people are going into perimenopause, the more women will come out the other side still being active and strong. And I do still believe in 5-10 years time, master age group competition is going to be huge because of this information that's now out there.
I think it's already starting, because I coach masters athletes across cycling and triathlon. If you look at triathletes, because they are super obsessive, the masters aspect, anybody in their 40s and 50s will say, well, maybe 10 years ago, or even 7 or 5 years ago, you'd have entered a race, and if you were pretty fit, you'd have said, I'll probably do really well here. But nowadays, I think it's like these guys train like pro athletes. They eat like pro athletes. They sleep like pro athletes. They lift like pro athletes. And therefore, they are putting in phenomenal times at the age of 40, 50, 60, and it's like, how are these guys doing this? It's just because they're better informed.
They're better informed, and you've got more time on your hands because you've either retired or, like I said, the kids have left home. You don't have to run around after them so much. You can eat more of the foods that you want to eat, and you have more time to put into your training. And if you get your training right, then you can be very competitive for a very, very long time.
I think it's really exciting, to be honest, and it's something that interesting. Actually, I put a video up on the YouTube channel about some of the training I did to get me to PB up Sarclobra, which has kind of like gathered a bit of moss and keeps rolling out, and people are responding to it, which is great. And I think the resounding conversation that I'm having around that on social media is the fact that people are saying, it is possible to do this. I do this kind of training. I hadn't realized that you could do that. That's quite a cool way of training and thinking about it. And I think as more people become aware of what is possible and keep working at it, and this is the thing I think a lot of people, who aren't coached or maybe don't have people who support them and push them, they either have a cohort of friends who basically say, well, I've hit 50, I'm doing nothing now because I've hit 50 and I should be relaxing and, you know, stretching and yogaing, and that's all I'm going to do. No, there's nothing wrong with stretching and yogaing, but that if you really want to be good, you need to do the things you've always done. And as in strength train, do high intensity training on the bike, you know, all these things that keep you using your muscles in the way that keep them functioning in the way that you want to in later life. And actually, the interesting thing is you were chatting earlier and saying, you know, you're funding your long-term health. And I was actually thinking back, well, actually, when you're 20, 30, because we know when you go through menopause, things start to be much tougher for you to be able to put on lean muscle mass, your hormones go all over the place. Would it not be, and it's long-term thinking, but would it not be really beneficial for people in their 20s and 30s to really take charge of their 50s and 60s in their 20s and 30s, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you're in your 20s and your 30s, and you know, people pick up a challenge, like, you know, you haven't raced for ages, or there's a 100-mile gravel event, for instance. You know, when you're 25 and you're like, well, the longest ride I've done is 50 miles. Oh yeah, I'll give it a go, I'll see what happens. And you're completely beaten up, and you bounce back and recover within 4, 5, 6 days, and you can go off again. And you party a little bit harder, you have a few more McDonald's and you know, things like that. I'm not saying don't do it. It's great. Go out there and make the most of it. But I would definitely say for women, when you get over the age of 30, and if you're taking part in events and you're going, I'm loving this, and I want to be doing this in 20 years' time, you need to get yourself down the gym. You need to make sure that you're doing some plyometrics. You need to start making sure that your diet's good. You can still have a drink and stuff like that, but just get those habits in place and start to understand about your period cycle. That's probably the most important thing. Understand your cycle, because when that starts to change, because if I paid more attention to what my period was doing back in 2019 and I was starting to get those symptoms, I would probably have noticed there was a little bit of a change in there as well at the same time.
Well, look, do you want to chat about period cycle and how that works?
Basically, it's not 28 days like people think it is. Everybody's different. So it could be anything between 21 and I think up to like 43 days for some people. And it's when your estrogen and progesterone will be kind of on a roller coaster. One will be up, one will be down. And then at a certain point, they change. One gets higher, one drops. That's when you have your period. And then that gets rid of, because basically your body then go, you're not going to have a baby this month, so we're going to continue with our cycle. You need to get rid of your womb lining, and you need to get rid of that, and then we'll build again, getting ready for in case you to be fertile again for the next month. And that's a very quick summary of it. But it's what the hormones do and what the hormones affect you. So the days after your period, so days 2 or 3 after you've been bleeding, your hormones are in a state that you are a feeling of being invincible. You're strong. You can go to the gym. You'll be lifting PB weights. You'll be smashing out VO2 sessions. If you're a sprinter, you'll be smashing out massive watts, and you'll be really strong. All your muscles are really strong. There's no inflammation, and your body's running smoothly. As you start heading towards the say if you're on a 28-day cycle, as you start heading towards the 14 days, your estrogen is starting to drop a bit, and progesterone is starting to rise, which means there's a bit more inflammation just in your system already. And that means that you might want to just change your training just a little bit, and not try and lift so heavy. You might be a bit more susceptible to injuries. And then as you get a bit closer to your period, about 5 days out, you'll start noticing symptoms. Again, all your symptoms are very different, very personalized. So that could be breast tenderness, can't sleep, body temperature goes up and down. That affects your sleep, or that affects your how you perform, because we all know your heart rate will go up if it's hot. So if you already have a raised heart rate, that's going to affect how you're going to perform. You're going to feel tired. Your mood is going to change. You're going to feel bloated. You might have some gut issues. And then as you bleed, start your period again, all of a sudden the estrogen goes back up again, and you're just invincible again. Quick summary.
Well, decent summary. I think the thing is, from the people that I've worked with, again, the females I've worked with, some people breeze through their period quite happily, and some people are absolutely floored by it. And I know when I've worked with them, and they've been scratching their heads and saying, you know, why am I so useless? So don't overthink this. It's just your body, and that's the way you go through your period. And if I am impart and say, look, this is you, and you have to accept it and embrace it. So we know that when you're feeling super strong, that's when we're going to do the most efforts, the hardest training that we're going to give you. And as we start getting to that point where you start to lose power, in fact, I used to do this with one of the girls that I coached. We used to have strong weeks. We'd put it in training peaks and say, look, we know these are going to be your strong weeks. So this is when we need to focus, and you can't go partying too hard because we're going to do some really hard, tough training. And then it's like, these weeks, we're just going to keep it really steady. And we could then plan forward and look at the races and hope that we were on the right track. But yeah, I mean, I think when she first started with me, she was scratching her head going, this is horrendous. I'm like, look, this is just you, and we just need to work with it, not fight it.
Yeah, exactly. It's having that understanding as a coach, and also as the athlete, that what does my cycle do to me? So okay, so I do get some symptoms that really I'm gonna struggle to go out and smash even a 4-hour ride, endurance ride. I'm just, physically, mentally, I can't go and do that during that time. It's like, right, okay, so we make that your rest week. Now we all know that a Monday to Sunday, it's not a week. So if your period happens to start on a Tuesday, for instance, we're going to start adjusting your training from Thursday to Thursday, and that's when we're going to have a recovery time, and we'll send you out Saturday and Sunday, and you're just going to go and smash the next sessions that you're going to do. But the important thing to remember is you can manage symptoms by a good diet and good recovery, and keep some kind of movement going. You don't have to completely stop. Yes, there are some symptoms where it completely floors you, and you have to understand that, yeah, maybe for about 2 days I really can't do much. I might be able to go and do some light mobility work, or go for a walk, or even a swim if you're not bleeding too much and you feel comfortable doing that, because it's easy on you. But keep moving, keep your nutrition as good as possible throughout your cycle, not just at that point. Supplement zinc, iron, magnesium, a few other combinations of things, and that will help to manage the symptoms. But understand that, right, this, in my diary, my Training Peaks diary, this is when I'm expecting my period. Mark it in there, so then us as coaches know, right, okay, 3 days before, we know that fatigue starts to kick in a little bit more. Couple of days usually after the period starts, depending on how much the person bleeds, or depending on, because sometimes you just get completely whacked with the fatigue stick, and you just can't, you're just like,
yeah,
getting up and going to work is just, but 2 days later because you've had all that rest, you're like, I'm really good to go. So your body's not fighting against you. You've just got to work with it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And also it's just guiding as a coach, guiding people through it and saying, look, don't worry about this. It's like, we know this happens. It's like you need to accept it, and then we can crack on. And helping people understand that it is normal for them to be in that process. Just because other people breeze through it doesn't mean that you're going to, and vice versa. And I think I always say to my female athletes, I was like, I think I'm so glad I was born a man because we don't understand the trials and tribulations that you guys go through. We can see it, and we can, as a coach, I think this is what's really cool. We really see the differences through different age groups, but we can't really go through it ourselves. We never really understand how it mentally impacts us. And it does. It's, time of the month, every month. It's like, that's hard work for some people. And then going through menopause. I mean, guys just don't have it. That we're just like,
you just have a little trickle of your hormones are just slowly just trickling away over time.
yeah.
And yeah, you do notice it, because you're like, oh yeah, a couple of years ago I used to be able to smash this out. Now I need 2 days, 3 days rest afterwards, and I can't, I need a bit more rest. But unfortunately for some women, they get KO'd monthly, and then when the perimenopause comes along, that you're just like, I'm just going to wake up in the morning, you're going to throw a bunch of balls at me, and I'm just going to catch what I can, because I don't know what each day's going to be.
Yeah.
But by it's just understanding. That's all it is. Understanding good habits, and informing yourself, and understanding that everybody's different.
That's an interesting thing. I'd love guys to listen to this podcast and really understand what's going on with their other halves, because there's some funny stuff out on the internet. But I remember, actually, it was James Smith who did a YouTube video on the monthly cycle, and he was saying, guys, you need to listen to this, because this is the time to ask your girlfriend for this. But this is not the time to ask your girlfriend for that, which was funny. And and it's a brilliant video. I might find that and link that to under this podcast, because I think it's important for guys to understand what's going on with their female other halves, and sort of like really sort of align with them a little bit and go, okay, well, look, this is clearly what's going on with them this next couple of days, or all the way through the menopause, because guys are clueless on this as well, and again, I think we're lucky in a roundabout way. As a coach, we see everything. If you do this job long enough, you experience a lot of people's problems, trials and tribulations, and therefore you see it from many aspects rather than just your own. This is such a fascinating subject. If we talk about nutrition, we've talked about protein. Is there anything in particular that we feel that we should be focusing on with nutrition, or is it just eating within our calories? So a lot of people, I think what's good to discuss is a lot of people will talk about, as they hit menopause, their metabolism plummets and everything changes, and they find it hard to lose weight. From my understanding and reading up in it and studying nutrition and body composition, is because your hormones change, your body composition may change along with it, but that's because your body deposits body fat in different places, or makes it harder to lose body fat from certain places, which a lot of people tend to just focus on. But from my understanding from studying it as well, is your metabolism doesn't change that much until you hit late 60s, and that's across the board. So is there anything from a nutritional perspective in practice that you think works best, or anything that you've read up on and studied that is evidence-based for people to sort of really understand what they should be focusing on?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is, because when estrogen declines, which is what it does during menopause, that's the point, is just the estrogen is declining because you are no longer fertile. Your body has decided that that time is up. So you no longer need to have this rise and fall of estrogen and progesterone. So progesterone tends to drop off a lot quicker, and estrogen is more dominant perimenopause, and then it slowly trickles away until you're in menopause, and then it will stay at a certain state, and that's where you will be for the rest. And then your metabolism then starts to kick in 60 plus. The thing with when estrogen declines, this allows cortisol to rise, and that triggers stress. And this is then when the body then tries to find a more natural way to produce more estrogen, because it is also confused and doesn't quite know what's going on. And part of that is weight gain, in particular fat, usually around the tummy kind of area, because you get estrogen from fat, basically. So your body is trying to protect itself, and you're freaking out going, I'm just all of a sudden, I'm doing everything the same. Nothing's changed, but I'm starting to put this weight on. So I'm going to cut my calories. I'm going to cut carbs out. I'm going to start fasting. I'm going to start running longer, slower, so I can do more, because I can't recover quick enough if I do harder efforts and things like that. But if you just understand that there's stress going on in your body, and you're going to put weight on, and that weight is going to be fat, it's an unfortunate effect of perimenopause. And you just need to understand that you will come out the other side. And as long as you have good habits in place, good nutritional habits, and you go to the gym, because we all know that the more muscle you have, the more calories you will burn as well. Plus you feel stronger, faster, so you'll do more. And then you will slowly, I don't know whether you can return to the weight that you were pre-perimenopause. I haven't seen any research or understand, but from a personal perspective, I do know that I put weight on, but I am now coming back to a point of it is starting to return to where I was probably back in 2017, 2018. And you still have days where it's a little bit different. And you tend to find that your reactions to carbohydrates does seem to be a little bit stronger. So you just have to get a little bit better with your timing of carbohydrates in particular, I think, but you still need them.
So basically it's timing your carbohydrates around your high end training, and maybe after training to promote recovery. But ultimately, I think the way I understand from studying with MNU is that calories are still important. So you'll see a lot of people talking about, calories mean nothing when you're going through menopause, and it doesn't matter how many calories you eat. If you're overeating carbohydrates, you put on body fat. And actually, that's not true. You still need to be within your calorie guidelines. How your body deposits fat changes potentially, but you still need to eat within your calories. And I think because hormones fluctuate, your mood changes, you get moments where your cravings increase. That's where people overeat high calorie foods, which is why potentially they put on body fat, rather than saying it's menopause that's causing me to put on weight. It sounds really bad, but it's because they're overeating calories. From my understanding, and again, it's because the hormones are fluxing and your body is positioning body fat in tougher places or more obvious places. That's the kicker. But if we eat a higher protein diet, if we stay within our calorie guidelines, we can control our body fatness. But the key aspect here is hitting the gym, because that helps you look leaner. it helps you maintain the muscle mass. It helps you look stronger. And I think not enough females do that for whatever reason. And I know it's something you and I have talked about a lot, that we try and get our female athletes to go to the gym and lift, because it makes a massive difference to how they look, feel, and perform. But again, from the studying nutrition, it's when I'm working in practice with the female athletes, and saying, look, this is what we need to do to keep you in the best shape we possibly can, is to look at your calories, try not to push them down too low. And this is the thing I think people tend to do. They hit menopause and they suddenly start doing strange diets like juice fasting for 2 days, and cutting out protein because someone on the internet told them to do that, because potentially they'll put on weight. And it's like, well, no, you need to eat, as we've talked about earlier, consistent protein across the board, good quality protein, and just be mindful of your total calories that you're having over the day, and just look at the quality of the food you're eating.
Yeah, and also, I mean, just last night, to be honest, I was scrolling through Strava, and I saw two females that I don't 100% know what age they are, but I know they're not far from my age, both saying they'd done fasted rides yesterday. And I was just like, I don't want to preach, I don't want to shout at people and things like that, but putting yourself in a fasted state raises your cortisol, it raises your stress. So your body just wants to then just grab, just like, I need this, I'm losing estrogen, so I'm gonna retain this fat. And you're just gonna keep throwing fasted rides at me. So we're just gonna have a complete argument now. And you're gonna keep doing this stupid diet or whatever exercise regime that you're doing. And I'm just gonna be really stubborn and I'm just gonna keep hold of this fat. Whereas
just to be clear, we don't coach these people, do we?
No, we don't coach them. we don't coach them, but I'm just like, just it's information that women really need to get across. I don't think now, I don't know the science and I haven't read enough into it, but personally, I don't think anything fasted for a female is very good at all because of the way female hormones react. Yes, it works. It probably works well for a man. I'm not even 100% sure because it has to be done completely right. It's a fad, isn't it?
Yeah, so 100%. I'll say this, and we've briefly touched on it. Is that our nutrition as we get older does not and should not follow what younger athletes are doing, because especially for females when they're going through menopause and males as they get older, because of protein resistance within the muscle, because it takes us longer to recover from training, it makes zero sense, absolutely no sense at all, to do fasted training for bouts of time on no energy, no protein, and then expect your body to turn over protein to build muscle. It just makes no sense. And then when you look at the fact that, no, have I turned it on or off? Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was lamenting and then I turned my mic off. It makes zero sense for me and any of the athletes that I'm coaching and cyclists I'm coaching to take protein or food or energy out of their diet when they're asking it to try and adapt and improve their physicality. The fad of doing fasted training to improve the biogenesis of your aerobic muscles is, I think that's been shown to be minimal at best. So why do it in the first place? And people talking about riding long and fasted to improve their body's ability to burn body fat. Well, that's not body fat they're burning. It's potentially muscle and blood lipids, right? So yes, okay, potentially you're extending your ability to conserve muscle glycogen and use blood lipids as a fuel source. But look, you don't need to do that. You just don't. You can eat on the bike, train well, fuel well, eat within a calorie balance, and you will get the body composition you should be aiming for over time. And importantly, you'll be able to train more effectively. you'll perceive your training better, and you'll recover faster from eating an adequately and appropriate diet. I don't know how many times I have to talk about this and then get really angry about it.
Yeah, doesn't matter how you have to wrap it up and say it again. It's just like it's just like designing training programs. You know, it's the same thing. I just trying to make it less boring for you. This is the same thing. It's just don't do it. Okay, if you think the carbs are really bad and they're causing something, before you go out on a ride, still at least have some protein and fats or something, and take a gel with you. Because as soon as you start feeling that zap go out of your legs, take the gel.
It's probably a bit late by then.
Yeah, well, yeah, it probably is a bit late, but take the gel, get home, and get back onto your normal carb, fat, protein diet, and get your calories in.
I think
yeah,
this is what's really cool about what we're doing at Velo, which is educating and whether, constantly sort of like making sure people are doing the right things, and backing it up week in, month in, talking about it in different ways, what we've seen, what the current trend is, and maybe why we shouldn't be doing that, and writing our educational post each month and all that sort of stuff, because it's not just about hit your program and that's it. It's like, let's make sure that you guys are consistently doing the right things across the board, week in, week out, so you understand that this is what you should do. So there's so much information out on the internet, and from influencers who should know better or don't know better, that actually it drives me nuts. And when I see people, so classic example, I won't name him, this guy that I ride with here, he's a 60 plus gentleman who does lots of fasted training and swears by it, but then he's tiny and has zero power on the bike, and it's like, well, this is clearly not working for you. However, he's absolutely adamant that it is. But some people you can coach, and some people are totally uncoachable. Anyway, I think we're getting off subject.
Yeah. But basically, it's about forming habits for a lifetime, and they're really important the older that you get. But, and I hate to say it, you need to start when you're 30, not when you're 50 or when you're 60.
Yeah.
It's got, because you deem that as being old age. You're not, it's just like menopause, for instance, in the Western culture, menopause is deemed as, that's it, your time is up. You should go and sit in the armchair, start knitting, tend to your garden, and that's what it is. If you go to Eastern cultures, Japan, China, they celebrate older people, because it's like, this is freedom. You are now free to go and do what you want when you want to go and do it. So it's a mindset change that needs to happen, and we need to understand that we can continue doing what we love doing for as long as possible, but be mindful, you've got to start putting those habits in place a little bit earlier than you think. You're not old. I'm not calling anybody old. I'm just saying you've just got to put those building blocks in place a little bit earlier. And if I knew that at 30, I would have really appreciated that.
This is the message we're trying to get out, right? So it's like, you can do all of this as you hit your 40s and plus. You just need to work at it, and you need to be specific. And that's what's really cool about what we're creating is that we're just creating this environment where people can come on board and they're training and they're surrounded by other people who are doing the same thing, because they may not be surrounded by other people doing the same thing, and they may feel like they're the only ones. And it's tough to keep going when your friends are saying, why are you doing this? Don't you think you should slow down? Blah, 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 blah. And I hear it, people say it to me all the time, but I completely ignore them. And it's if you've got people around you who are doing it and producing results and getting excited about doing what they're doing, then actually that's really important. And the more we can bang that drum, I think the better.
Yeah, exactly. And also, what everybody should put on their 50th birthday list is a gym subscription. Just so they got a gym membership for life, for the rest of their life.
So, do you know, annoyingly, you cut out there as you're saying, but
no. But basically, that's it. And everybody's 50th birthday list is that they should have a gym subscription. Everybody should get a gym membership for your 50th because you've got all the time in the world to go and use it.
I reckon at 40 they should get a gym.
Well, yeah, okay, yeah,
and then never stop.
yeah.
Cool. Look. Thank you. I think let's stop it there. The one thing I'm going to ask you, I'm going to throw it at you. I always ask people on the podcast, if there was one person that you could speak to, whether they're living or dead, and have dinner with them, who would that be and why?
Oh my God, that's really hard. Oh man, that's really hard. You could have pre-warned me on that one. I would say only because I'm listening to a certain audio book at the moment called Stand, which is about an activist, a female activist, about getting the Women's Tour de France up and running. And I'm learning so much on there about like so many people that I know and what they did to like work towards it. But I never realised how much Emma Pooley did for women's cycling, and just massively underrated. She's still alive, so I'm more than happy to go and have dinner with her. I think she lives in Switzerland as well.
Yeah, amazing. All right, good answer. Yeah, good answer. And it's really interesting. So I don't know enough about it, if I'm really honest, but what I have noticed from social media is Ashley Momompasio, who's really heralding female cycling and trying to encourage more people to get into it. And I think that's just a good thing, you know.
Being South African as well, she comes from an infrastructure that is nothing like ours and is massively behind, especially in women's cycling and probably women's sport in general. And having people like Ashley riding in the women's pro peloton is it's if you sometimes I don't like the phrase if you can see it you can be it, but in that case I think it's really important.
Yeah, 100%. Look, thank you so much for taking your time out today. I think that's been a fun conversation and really interesting. So I hope people listening in have got something out of that. Thank you so much for coming.
Pleasure, anytime.
I hope you enjoyed that podcast. It's really cool to have Sue on board here as part of the coaching team. She's definitely bringing a great new dynamic to the coaching and helping our female athletes understand their monthly cycles and understand how they can navigate through menopause. Look, if you've found this podcast insightful or helpful in any way and you think someone else can benefit from it, please do share it with them. And to help us grow over time, giving us a review would be really, really helpful. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next month.